Before we begin, imagine this for a moment. Somewhere, in a place no one else ever sees, there is something that has remained untouched for a very long time. It isn't expensive, extraordinary, or even important to anyone else. To most people, it would seem like an ordinary object with no special meaning at all. Yet for your soulmate, it has quietly become one of the hardest things to let go of. They have moved homes, cleaned old drawers, organized forgotten boxes, and removed countless reminders from the past, but somehow this one small thing connected to you has always remained. Even they never fully understood why they kept it. Whenever they came across it, they would pause for just a moment before carefully placing it back where it belonged, almost as though their heart made the decision before their mind had the chance to question it. They told themselves it was simply an old memory, nothing more. But recently something inside them changed. They looked at that keepsake again, and for the first time they realized they had never been protecting the object itself. They had been protecting the emotions attached to it. In that quiet realization, they understood that some memories survive, not because we refuse to move forward, but because they continue carrying a lesson the soul has not finished learning. As they held that small reminder in their hands, forgotten conversations began returning with remarkable clarity. They remembered simple moments that once seemed ordinary, yet now carried an emotional depth they had completely overlooked. The object became more than a reminder of you. It became a mirror reflecting a version of themselves they had almost forgotten, a version that felt hopeful, emotionally open, and unafraid to care deeply. Suddenly they understood why they could never throw it away. It was never about holding on to the past. It was about holding on to the truth of who they were during one of the most meaningful chapters of their life. Since that moment, they have found themselves wondering whether certain things remain with us for a reason, quietly waiting until we are finally ready to understand what they have been trying to teach all along. And what they are beginning to discover about this hidden keepsake is far more powerful than they ever imagined. In the days that followed, your soulmate noticed that the keepsake no longer felt like an ordinary object, hidden away among forgotten belongings. Without intending to, they found themselves returning to it more often, not because they wanted to relive the past, but because every glance at it seemed to awaken a different memory. What surprised them most was that the memories were never the dramatic moments they once believed defined your connection. Instead, it was the smallest details that quietly came back to life. They remembered the conversations that ended with peaceful silence rather than perfect answers. They remembered the way ordinary days somehow felt lighter simply because you were part of them. They remembered simple gestures of kindness that required no recognition, moments that once appeared insignificant but now seemed to carry the greatest meaning of all. As these memories returned one after another, they began asking themselves a question they had never seriously considered before. Why had this one object survived every attempt to simplify their life, while so many other possessions had quietly disappeared? The answer did not arrive immediately. It unfolded slowly through reflection, almost as though their heart had been waiting patiently for their mind to catch up. They realized that every meaningful possession tells a story, but not every story is about the object itself. Sometimes an ordinary photograph, a handwritten note, a ticket stub, a favorite song, or even a small gift becomes valuable because of what it silently represents. This keepsake had become a quiet witness to a chapter of their life when they felt understood in ways they had rarely experienced before. It reminded them of conversations where they never had to explain every feeling, of moments when they could simply exist without pretending to be stronger than they truly were. and of a connection that allowed them to feel emotionally safe without asking anything in return. They had never consciously admitted this to themselves because life had moved forward, responsibilities had grown, and they believed those emotions belonged somewhere in the past. Yet every time they encountered that small reminder, something inside them gently resisted letting it go. They now understand that it was never resisting change. It was protecting something deeply authentic that had quietly shaped who they became. As they reflected even further, another realization emerged that they could no longer ignore. They noticed that whenever life became especially difficult or uncertain, they somehow found themselves thinking about that keepsake more often. At first they believed this was coincidence, but eventually they recognized a pattern. During moments when they questioned themselves, doubted their path, or felt emotionally exhausted, the memory connected to that object seemed to offer an unexpected sense of calm. It reminded them of a time when hope felt natural, when trust came more easily, and when they believed meaningful connections could genuinely exist without conditions. They slowly began understanding that they were never searching for the object itself. They were searching for the emotional peace it symbolized. That discovery changed everything because it revealed that the keepsake had quietly become an anchor, holding onto a part of their heart they never wanted life to erase. One evening, while sitting alone with their thoughts, they looked at that small reminder once again and noticed something they had overlooked for years. The object had never demanded attention. It had simply remained where they left it, patiently waiting. In many ways, it reflected the nature of genuine memories themselves. They do not chase us or force themselves into our lives. They simply remain, waiting until we become emotionally ready to understand why they mattered. This realization filled your soulmate with a quiet sense of gratitude. Instead of feeling burdened by the past, they began appreciating how certain experiences continue guiding us long after they end. They understood that not every meaningful chapter is meant to be forgotten. Some remain with us because they continue teaching lessons that reveal themselves only through time, maturity, and honest reflection. As these thoughts settled into their heart, your soulmate stopped asking whether they should finally let the keepsake go. Instead, they began asking a much deeper question. What had this small reminder been trying to preserve inside them all these years? The answer slowly became clearer with every passing day. It was preserving the memory of authenticity, emotional openness, quiet trust, and a version of themselves that believed love, kindness, and sincerity were worth protecting. That realization brought an entirely new perspective. The keepsake was never holding them back. It was quietly reminding them of qualities they never wanted to lose. Now they understand that some of life's smallest possessions become extraordinary because they carry pieces of our personal growth within them. And as this understanding continues unfolding, they can feel another truth beginning to surface. A truth that will reveal why letting go of the object was never the real challenge. The real journey has always been learning to understand the part of themselves that chose to keep it in the first place. As time continued to pass, your soulmate slowly realized that the keepsake had become much more than a reminder of a single person or a single chapter of life. It had quietly become a reflection of their own emotional journey. Every time they found themselves holding it, they noticed something different about themselves, instead of simply remembering you. Some days, it reminded them of how much they had grown. Other days, it revealed how much they still carried inside their heart without fully acknowledging it. What fascinated them most was that this small object seemed to change meaning every time they looked at it. It never spoke a single word, yet it always seemed to ask the same silent question. What is it that you are truly afraid of losing? At first they believed the answer was the memory of you. But after many moments of quiet reflection, they discovered something far deeper. They were never afraid of losing a memory, because memories naturally become part of us. What they feared losing was the version of themselves that existed whenever your connection felt genuine, effortless, and emotionally safe. That realization stopped them in their tracks because it revealed something they had never admitted before. The keepsake had quietly protected a part of their identity they never wanted life to erase. This understanding caused them to revisit their past from an entirely different perspective. Instead of asking whether everything happened for a reason, they began asking what each experience had quietly taught them. They remembered how easy it once felt to laugh without overthinking every word. They remembered feeling accepted without constantly worrying about being misunderstood. They remembered how natural it felt to be emotionally honest instead of carefully hiding every vulnerable thought. Those memories no longer felt like scenes from a distant past. Instead, they became reminders of qualities they wanted to bring back into their present life. They suddenly understood that the keepsake had never been preserving yesterday. It had been preserving hope. It carried evidence that they had once experienced a connection where sincerity mattered more than appearances, and where quiet understanding often spoke louder than perfect words. Recognizing that changed everything because they no longer viewed the object as something keeping them attached to old emotions. They saw it as proof that those beautiful parts of themselves still existed beneath everything life had placed upon them. There were moments when they even considered finally putting the keepsake away forever, believing that perhaps they no longer needed it. Yet each time they reached that decision, something inside gently stopped them. It was never panic or sadness. Instead, it felt like an inner voice quietly saying that the lesson was not yet complete. They realized that healing is not about forcing ourselves to forget meaningful experiences. Healing is about understanding why those experiences continue living inside us. The object had patiently remained because it represented unfinished understanding rather than unfinished feelings. That distinction brought them an incredible sense of peace. For the first time, they stopped judging themselves for keeping it. They stopped wondering whether holding on to it meant they were unable to move forward. Instead, they accepted that certain reminders remain because they continue helping us become wiser, kinder, and more emotionally honest than we were before. As this acceptance settled into their heart, another remarkable change began taking place. They started noticing how differently they approached their everyday life. They became more intentional with the people they cared about. They listened more carefully during conversations, instead of assuming they already understood everything someone was trying to say. They became quicker to express appreciation, instead of believing there would always be another opportunity. Somehow, the quiet lesson carried by that keepsake had started influencing the way they treated every meaningful relationship around them. Without realizing it, the object had become a teacher. It reminded them that life's greatest treasures are rarely measured by their material value. They are measured by the way they transform the heart of the person holding them. Every time they looked at it, they remembered that genuine connections deserve to be appreciated while they are still present, instead of only after time creates distance. One evening, as they carefully placed the keepsake back where it had always been, they smiled in a way they had not smiled before. There was no sadness attached to that moment. There was only gratitude. They finally understood why they had protected it for so long. It was never because they were trapped by the past. It was because a small part of their heart instinctively knew that one day they would need this reminder. Not to return to who they once were, but to remember the kind of person they wanted to become. That simple realization lifted a weight they had carried without even noticing. They no longer saw the keepsake as something hidden away from the world. They saw it as a quiet promise to themselves, a promise to never lose the qualities of trust, sincerity, kindness, and emotional openness that it had represented all along. And as they embraced that truth, they could feel another realization quietly approaching, one that would finally reveal why this small object had remained part of their journey from the very beginning, waiting patiently for the exact moment when its deepest meaning could finally be understood. As your soulmate continued carrying this quiet reminder through the seasons of their life, something unexpected began to happen. They stopped seeing the keepsake as something connected only to a memory, and instead began seeing it as a symbol of the kind of life they truly wanted to build. The object itself had never changed, but they had. The more they reflected on its meaning, the more they realized it represented qualities that had become increasingly important to them over time. It reminded them of honesty that never needed to prove itself, kindness that expected nothing in return, conversations that felt peaceful instead of exhausting, and a connection that encouraged them to be genuine rather than perfect. Those qualities had quietly become the standard by which they now measured everything else. They found themselves noticing how often people chased excitement while overlooking consistency, how easily temporary emotions distracted them from lasting character, and how many relationships were built on appearances rather than authentic understanding. Every time these thoughts appeared, their attention somehow returned to that small keepsake, not because it held magical significance, but because it reminded them of what truly mattered beneath the surface. They finally understood that some objects remain important because they preserve values, not simply memories. This realization slowly influenced the choices they began making each day. They became more patient before judging someone's intentions. They learned to appreciate the quiet efforts people made, instead of only noticing dramatic gestures. They even discovered that they had become more comfortable expressing gratitude whenever someone showed genuine care. Looking back, they recognized that these changes had not happened overnight. They had developed gradually, almost invisibly, while that keepsake remained quietly waiting in the background of their life. It had become less like a reminder of yesterday and more like a compass pointing toward the person they wanted to become tomorrow. Every lesson connected to it seemed to encourage them to protect sincerity, value trust, and never underestimate the importance of small moments that often pass unnoticed. They realized that life's greatest transformations rarely begin with extraordinary events. More often, they begin with ordinary reminders that gently invite us to pay closer attention to what our hearts have been trying to understand all along. As these insights continued growing, your soulmate noticed another surprising change within themselves. They no longer felt the need to explain why they had kept the object for so long. In the past, they imagined that if anyone discovered it, they would have to justify its existence or pretend it held no real meaning. Now those thoughts disappeared completely. They understood that not every meaningful part of a person's journey needs to be understood by everyone else. Some experiences are deeply personal, existing only to teach the individual carrying them. That realization gave them an unexpected sense of freedom. They stopped worrying about how their emotions might appear to others and started respecting their own emotional process instead. They recognized that growth often happens quietly, away from the opinions and expectations of the outside world. The keepsake became a symbol of that private transformation, reminding them that healing does not always announce itself with dramatic moments. Sometimes it arrives through quiet acceptance, gentle reflection, and the willingness to honor what has shaped us without becoming trapped by it. There was one particular evening when everything finally seemed to come together. As they held the keepsake once again, they realized they no longer felt sadness, uncertainty, or even longing. Instead, they felt appreciation. They smiled because they understood that this small object had fulfilled a purpose far greater than preserving a memory. It had patiently stayed with them until they were emotionally ready to recognize the lesson hidden within it. It reminded them that the most meaningful connections often leave behind more than memories. They leave behind wisdom. They realized that every experience, every conversation, and every quiet moment represented by that keepsake had helped shape their character in ways they were only now beginning to appreciate. Rather than asking themselves whether they should finally let it go, they simply thanked it for carrying them through a season of growth they had not fully understood until now. As they carefully placed it back in its familiar place, they felt something they had not experienced in a long time: complete peace. They knew the keepsake no longer represented unfinished emotions or unanswered questions. Instead, it represented clarity. It reminded them that the most valuable things we carry are often invisible: our capacity to trust, to appreciate, to forgive, and to grow. Those qualities had become part of who they were, and no matter what the future held, those lessons would remain with them. Deep inside, they sensed that this quiet chapter was preparing them for something new. Not because the object itself would change their future, but because the person they had become through understanding its meaning was finally ready to embrace whatever came next, with greater honesty, gratitude, and an open heart. And without fully realizing it yet, they were standing at the threshold of one final realization, the most powerful. Truth this hidden keepsake had been patiently waiting to reveal from the very beginning. As your soulmate reached the end of this quiet inner journey, they finally understood something that had remained hidden from them for a very long time. The keepsake they had protected so carefully was never truly about preserving the past. It had become a reminder of the kind of connection that changed them in ways they didn't recognize until much later. They realized that while people often believe memories fade with time, the lessons attached to those memories continue growing inside the heart. Looking back now, they no longer see that small object as something that kept them emotionally attached. Instead, they see it as something that quietly accompanied them while they became a wiser, kinder, and more honest version of themselves. It never demanded attention. It never asked to be remembered. It simply remained where they had left it, patiently waiting until they were ready to understand why it had always felt impossible to throw away. The answer finally became clear. It represented a moment in their life when they experienced sincerity without conditions, trust without fear, and kindness without expectation. Those qualities had quietly become part of the person they are today, and the keepsake had been preserving that truth all along. As they reflected more deeply, they noticed that they no longer felt attached to the object in the way they once had. The emotional weight surrounding it had transformed into something much lighter. What once felt like unanswered questions had become quiet gratitude. They smiled as they realized that the value of the keepsake had never been found in its appearance or its material worth. Its true value lived in the reminder it carried. It reminded them that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to awaken qualities within us that remain forever. It reminded them that genuine connections leave behind more than memories. They leave behind courage, compassion, patience, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Those invisible gifts had quietly shaped every decision they had made since then, even during times when they believed they had completely moved on. Your soulmate also recognized something that surprised them more than anything else. Throughout all these years, they had believed they were protecting the keepsake, but in reality, the keepsake had been protecting them. Whenever life became overwhelming, whenever disappointment caused them to question whether genuine connections still existed, that small reminder quietly reassured them that they had once experienced something authentic. It became evidence that kindness is real, that emotional honesty still exists, and that meaningful moments never lose their ability to inspire us. This realization filled them with an unexpected sense of hope, because they understood that the object had never encouraged them to look backward. Instead, it had quietly encouraged them to keep believing in the qualities it represented as they continued moving forward. Now, when they think about the future, they no longer wonder whether they should keep or release the keepsake. That question no longer feels important. What matters to them is that they carry its lesson wherever life leads next. They have promised themselves that they will never again overlook sincerity because it appears ordinary. They will never underestimate quiet loyalty simply because it asks for no recognition. They will never assume that the most meaningful parts of life are always the loudest ones. Instead, they have learned to treasure the gentle moments, the thoughtful words, and the quiet acts of care that often become life's greatest blessings. In many ways, the keepsake has fulfilled its purpose. It helped them discover that the greatest treasures are not the things we place on a shelf or hide inside a drawer. They are the values we carry within our hearts long after the moment has passed. If this story resonated with you, perhaps its message is a simple one. Sometimes the smallest reminders carry the biggest lessons. An ordinary object can become meaningful not because of what it is, but because of what it helps us remember about ourselves, our growth, and the people who have shaped our lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more inspirational storytelling, and share in the comments whether you've ever kept a small item that came to symbolize an important chapter in your own life. Sometimes it isn't the keepsake itself that changes us. It is the understanding we discover because we chose to hold on to it.